shine on. Let your light from the lighthouse shine on me. Let it shine on me. Let it shine on me. Let your light from the lighthouse shine on me. Now here comes the Holy Ghost. The Holy Ghost come along late. And when they come along late, they get your name straight because they drive the song. Don't fool yourself. Now they don't pick up the speed, and that's where you get this rhythm and swing at it.
For mayor of the city and county of Denver, I intend to run, and with your help, we're going to win.
Dale Tooley, November 1970. The first of 3 times he ran for mayor of Denver.
You know, Denver is a good city. It has a potential for greatness.
Dale Tooley, February 1985.
It's but to build a society and make it better when you leave than when you're born, I think is one of the callings of mankind. And people who do not feel that way, I feel very sorry for.
Tooley, the campaigner.
We still have time to solve those problems. We're drifting, frankly, in a vacuum because of a lack of energetic leadership and because of a lack of clear direction in our city.
Former Mayor William McNichols, 3 times an opponent of Tooley, has known him for 20 years. He says Tooley is a fierce and capable competitor.
We did some good things together, although on many occasions we were clawing each other up occasionally.
A special recollection?
Well, I was always very impressed with the gracious way he conducted himself after an election, which is the true measure of a person, I think. It's easy to win, you know, you don't have much to... But he was very, very gracious and sincere, no question about it. And we've confronted each other 3 times and got to know each other pretty well. I have a high regard for him, and I know he knows that.
We both want a safe city. The question is, how do you get there? The vision is a safe city. The blueprint is where we differ. And it's my judgment that the kind of focus on violent and career criminals, which I have supported, is the correct procedure to do that.
Denver Mayor Federico Pena.
He made a commitment to public service, left a very lucrative law practice years ago to run for district attorney, and was committed to serving the people of Denver in one capacity or another, and always providing leadership in a very difficult situation. And you have to remember that being district attorney of the city is a very tough job, and he did it well. And he's always had, I think, the interests of the people of Denver at heart.
Norm Early worked for Dale Tooley and eventually replaced him as Denver District Attorney.
I think there's no question that Dale brought us the kind of criminal justice system of which all of us can be proud. He propelled this office not only into a leadership position among district attorneys' offices within Colorado, but also the entire nation.
In all Denver political races, Dale Tooley ran in nonpartisan contests, yet he is an active Democrat. He served as state Democratic leader. He played a role in the political career of U.S. Senator Gary Hart, though he supported Walter Mondale last year.
He is probably one of the first people I met when I came to Colorado in the 60s. I looked him up, and he introduced me to the Democratic Party and got me involved in Democratic politics in this state, for which I've always been grateful. But his contribution through his family, through his law practice, through the Democratic Party, and all sorts of social activities is just incalculable.
During this hour, we'll hear Dale Tooley talk about his legal career, his political life, his battle with, and his understanding of cancer. We'll hear of hope.
I don't think of the unfairness, then I don't think there will not be a tomorrow.
Of pride.
In 1980, I led the ticket in Denver with almost 64% of the vote.
Of mistakes.
And I was wrong, and those kids at Grant Park were right.
Of laughter. Dale Tooley is interviewed by two men who had known him professionally for many years. Howard Pankratz, legal affairs reporter for the Denver Post, covers courts and the district attorney's office. And Don Kenny, reported on Tooley's political career and also reports on medical topics. Late last November, Dale Tooley got a medical checkup. His doctors immediately knew something was wrong. On December 5th, Tooley was told his life is in jeopardy. He has advanced cancer in two important organs. The news was devastating.
Well, you know, Don, the 10 days before that, they were trying to figure out what was going on, and that was a tougher period of time. I do believe that people can handle almost anything if they got the facts. What is difficult to handle is the unknown. And I remember sitting there, and every time I asked a question, the news was worse, but the doctors were very candid. My wife was with me. So when we finished with all that news, Mary Ann and I went out and had a cup of coffee and said, well, what do we do now? And, you know, the first week was particularly tough. But you learn to handle those things. Everybody has matters in their lives they handle.
2 days later, you called the family together on Pearl Harbor Day.
Yes, as a matter of fact, all four of my children are at the University of Colorado, and finals were coming up. I didn't want to disturb them, but I knew it would likely get in the media, and I didn't want to read about it in the paper. So I called them all and told them that we were having a rare command performance. And they said, what is it, Dad? And I said, well, you'll find it of interest. And so they all came down, and over dinner we were as absolutely candid as we could be about what the situation was. And I must say they handled it very well.
What did you say?
Well, you know, I guess I've given 2,000 speeches over the course of my career, Don. That was the only performance that I didn't know if I could handle. And therefore, the night before, I wrote out a letter to each of them. Same letter to each. And we sat on over that Chinese food, which they didn't eat, and I did. I handed them the letter that described the bad news and the good news. And because I wasn't sure I could get through going through it all initially anyway. And then after that, you know, there were some tears and there was some laughter, and we talked for a couple of hours. That's how we handled it.
Their reaction?
Well, it was tough on them. We've been a very close family. And then one of my kids' reaction was, it's not fair. You know, it's not a matter of fairness, it's a matter of randomness. Another was angry, thought it was, you know, it should not have happened. They reacted differently, but you know, they're a very supportive group.
And you almost immediately jumped in, both feet, and started talking publicly about Dale Tooley and cancer.
Well, I didn't choose to do that. The media called, and initially I was reluctant about it. I wasn't at all sure it was newsworthy. But hindsight is that it is important to lay the matter out, that people ought to talk about it. Cancer, the prospect of death and dying are taboo subjects, and they'll continue to be taboo subjects until they're discussed openly like every other life process. And so I don't regret it, but it was not at first easy.
And because you were told, for you, this is not a long-term illness.
That's right. Yeah, they said this is a short fuse.
How short is the fuse?
Well, their initial idea was, you know, 90 days. I then asked the doctor to survey the country and see if this particular and really rare type of cancer, if there was anything going on that might have a degree of hope. And they did that and came upon this program at Johns Hopkins, which is it's the whole point of cancer. There's always hope. And it is a avant-garde, experimental, cutting-edge kind of thing. But, you know, Don, the whole area of cancer treatment is absolutely on the verge. It is literally months away in various kinds of these cancers to being either solved or close to it. And I think a lot of people don't understand that. There is always hope.
This is experimental treatment for you.
Well, experimental, but I'm not the Lone Ranger. There have now been a total of 200 people over the last 3 years who've had this particular kind of antibody treatment. But the exciting part of it is, there's a book on it called Magic Bullets, that if this develops what's called monoclonal antibodies, and I'm satisfied it will, cancer treatment will no longer be, in most cases, the painful chemotherapy and radiation and all the side effects. It will be a injection on an outpatient basis, inexpensive, where this kind of a nuclear-tipped a missile, if you will, attaches on to a receptor on the cancer cells and leaves the healthy cells alone and simply obliterates them. Exciting stuff. It's being manufactured today.
Does it give you unrealistic hope?
No, I don't think unrealistic. I mean, these people in the medical field, largely because of lawyers, I think, now are very big into informed consent, where you get all the statistics and all the odds, and no, it's not unrealistic.
Dale Tooley, when you go to bed at night, what do you think about? The unfairness, there may not be a tomorrow?
I don't think of the unfairness, and I don't think there will not be a tomorrow. I'm optimistic, and I expect if this can be licked, I will lick it. But I don't ever think in terms of unfairness or punishment. It just isn't that. I think that people have all kinds of things in their lives over which they have no control. Being hit by a drunk driver, a whole lot of things. And I guess I've just never thought of it in terms of blame or in terms of unfairness. It's a matter of randomness. If you accept the idea that on this planet we are creatures of free choice, there's also some randomness in what can happen to you. And beyond that, this is not unique. 1 out of 4 Americans will be stricken by cancer. More than half of them are going to be cured already. I think that number will go up. And everyone faces these kinds of matters. This isn't at all unique. It's unique, maybe it's a little more public, but it's nothing that virtually every person on the planet will not go through.
Publicly, we know you as an optimist, but is there also disappointment, anguish?
Well, sure. Was it W.C. Fields said on his tombstone, all other things being equal, I'd rather be in Philadelphia, you know. Sure, I'd had better days in December 5th of '84. But you accept the cards you're dealt. That great song by Kenny Rogers, The Gambler, you know, you got to know when to hold 'em, know when to fold 'em.
Part of the agony of what you're going through is pain. How do you deal with it?
Well, you know, it's hard to talk about pain because you can never remember whether it was the same or worse or less. And I think a lot of it is in the mind. This isn't all that painful, but there's pain. But I do think an awful lot of it is not paying a lot of attention to it. I think that different people deal with pain in different ways. But I can't sit here and say this is excruciatingly painful. It's not pleasant.
You've said if you ignore it, it doesn't hurt that much.
If you ignore it, it doesn't hurt that much.
This cancer may be a result of your having, what, hepatitis 20 or 30 years ago.
That's what the doctor said. It's hard to be sure. I don't recall ever having hepatitis ever.
You know, particularly because you've been a public figure, you know that there is a lot of concern about your environment, not only the air we breathe, but your mental state. Had Dale Tooley been elected mayor somewhere along the line, you think you'd have a different outlook and you may not have cancer today?
Oh, no, I think I'd had cancer, and I'd had a whale of a problem trying to run the city and deal with this, too. I guess I think that cancer is not all stress-related. That's part of it. But most people have stress and don't have cancer. I think it is a combination of environmental factors. Sometimes it's a flu, it's a hepatitis, it's a combination of randomness, just like getting a cold.
One of the things we often hear is that we ought to really pay attention to what our body is telling us. Were you not listening? Did you hurt and not do anything about it?
Didn't hurt, but my wife had been telling me the last 5 years I ought to really get in and get another physical, and I thought, why? How could I possibly need one in this vigorous body? But I did go in at the end of November of this past year. And it's clear that if people, I guess I followed what I call the Chevrolet theory, that if you don't look under the hood, maybe nothing will be wrong with the engine, you know. But people ought to go in with a reasonable degree of frequency and check up, because most cancers can be treated much more effectively if they're caught sooner.
What so far has been the toughest aspect for you?
Toughest aspect was telling the children. But of course that was a short period of time to get that accomplished. And the other tough aspect is, you know, you change your lifestyle. I went through a campaign where every week it was 100 hours a week. That's just what it took. And in a law practice where we're in court a lot, you know, it's a long week, high diet of things going on. And it's simply necessary with this problem to cut that back. And that's a big change in lifestyle.
If you could change something, what would it be?
Well, you know, there's not a lot I would change because there's nothing I've done that I think is the cause of this, no particular thing. I guess what I worry about, Don, is I think about all these lonely people on this earth of ours who do not have the kind of support mechanisms, the friends, the family, the wife that I have. And I wonder, how do they get through crises that everybody faces? How do lonely people get the support to go forward? And that's what astonishes me. And if I could change anything, I would want to build some system of giving them a degree of support.
As a member of the community, you've been involved for nearly a quarter of a century. You served as district attorney for 10 years. You've done a lot of things for the community. What's the community done for you?
Everything. Oh, I think you always get more out of what you give than what you, I've got a cart before the horse, but you always get more from giving, I think, than the receiver does. This is a great city, and the community is a remarkable one, and I'd rather be here than anywhere.
You've talked of unfinished business. What's unfinished for you?
Oh, a blizzard of things. Within the last 2 weeks, I formed a legal panel for the National Federation of the Blind, pro bono. Most of the leading law firms in Denver have agreed to participate in it. I want to do more work in that kind of area. I just finished, just this month, a book, which I hope to get published if it's any good. I want to get that rolling. I'm very anxious to get this cancer crusade off on the right foot, because I hope what we're doing here is unique enough it can be picked up elsewhere in the country. There are other do-gooder causes that I'm very interested in. I'm on the board of things like Children's Hospital and Boys Clubs and various organizations, and there's a lot of unfinished business with every one of those causes.
In a few minutes, reporter Kinney will return with film clips for Dale Tooley to recall and enjoy. But first, Denver Post legal affairs reporter Howard Pankratz continues our profile.
Dale, I want to go back 20 years to 1965. You were in Jackson, Mississippi 20 years ago.
Yes.
What were you doing down there?
I went down as a trial attorney. I volunteered for the American Civil Liberties Union, and we tried civil rights lawsuits.
There was quite a bit of danger down there back in those days, wasn't there?
Well, a lot more than I realized at the time. Yeah. As a matter of fact, there were a number of people killed while I was there. I was only there 2 weeks. But it was a real look at how a system ought not to work.
And basically you were defending civil rights activists?
Well, that's what I thought, but I soon learned that a civil rights case at that time in Mississippi was a white from the north or a black from anywhere. And so I tried cases that were as varied as disturbing religious worships to integrating lunch counters to aggravated assault.
You know, when I covered your office for about 6 years while you were there, and when I think of Dale Tooley, I think of the people that surrounded him. Why did you try to bring so many people of different races and religions into your office?
Well, you know, it's interesting because I did not know Jim Weissman was Jewish when I hired him. It just never occurred to me at all. And same is true with Diane Balkan. You obviously know when someone is black or Hispanic because it's apparent. And we had no quota system, and I didn't go out to try to do that. But when I took office, it was apparent to me there was one black, one woman, and one Hispanic. And I thought, how can you tap the talent you need to tap if you're only hitting half of the available pool of talent? So we began a real recruitment effort. I would send Bill Lucero to the University of Texas to interview, for example. And we didn't hire anybody that we didn't think was good. And if we did and they didn't work out, whatever their color, I fired them. Fortunately, that didn't happen too often, but it happened.
You know, I think a lot of people, especially in '73, kind of raised their eyebrows when they thought of having a liberal as a district attorney. Can he enforce justice? Can he go after the criminals? Did you have any problem convincing the people that you could be tough on criminals?
Well, I won the election by 33,000 votes, so at least that part worked all right. But, you know, it's funny, I never thought so much in liberal and conservative terms. It seemed to me that the most liberal of all positions was to care for the victim of crime. And I rather expect those 200,000 people that I prosecuted think of me as pretty conservative. So it depends on where one is in the system, their own perspective.
You worked awfully hard. Some of your friends have told me that you were a man that really wanted to serve the public, that you felt that that was really a high calling to be able to serve the people of Denver. Was that one of your motives?
Sure it is, but I must say, all people do things for different reasons. I mean, you are a reporter for a whole lot of reasons, because you like the work and it's important, the public's right to know, and it's also, you know, an important way to make a living. And I think serving in public office, it does have that flavor. It has a public policy impact, but it's also fascinating. And to that extent, it is a selfish interest, because it is very exciting to be able to make an impact, you know, on legislation, on a program that may affect a generation of kids. And so I guess people do things for a lot of combinations of reasons.
You know, you've lived in a fascinating period of American history. You were born, I guess, in 1934?
33.
33. You saw America at the height of its power right after World War II. I was a college young man when Jack Kennedy and Bob Kennedy and Martin Luther King were killed. Do you think their assassinations had any effect on the direction that this country took?
I do. I was chairman of the Democratic Party in 1968, the year that Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy were assassinated. And I remember vividly what that did to our country, and I remember that terribly tumultuous convention in Chicago that year. And I remember going to that convention, and I listened to Sorensen and all the rest of the speakers, and I thought that Johnson was right on Vietnam and that those kids in Grant Park were wrong. And I was wrong, and those kids at Grant Park were right. And then when you read the Pentagon Papers and the information that was withheld from citizens, I got angry that I felt I had been misled. And I had the impression that if King and Kennedy, and both Kennedys had not been assassinated, that there may not have been that degree of withholding of the facts from the American people. And maybe the folly of Vietnam could have been avoided. And maybe the civil rights movement would not have been as tumultuous and violent as it was. And I think it was a pivotal year, and I think the price we paid in this country for their deaths and for the atmosphere that was created in that year, we'll never be able to accurately measure.
Do you fear that the types of views that the Kennedys held, that Martin Luther King held, that you hold, are on the outs now, that it is trendy to be conservative and less open to the plight of the poor and minorities?
I think there's that possibility, but I guess I've come in contact with an awful lot of young people. I've had a reasonable amount of contact with the high school and college campuses over the last 15 years, and I think the general course is upward, not downward. I do believe there's a good deal of focus on the you know, what kind of a job am I going to get attitude. But I think there is a basic, hardcore patriotism and a desire to make this country better, which is as strong as it's ever been. And I think it's being tapped by all kinds of people. I think Walter Mondale and Gary Hart tapped that. I think there are Republicans like Baker that tap it. And I don't take the view that the fiber of this country is going downward. I think we kind of go forward in an uneven pace sometimes, but I'm not a pessimist about it.
Well, I know I talked to you in the spring of 1983, and I jotted down a note here. It said that you had a concern about the growth of apathy and a fixation on money in this country. And you said people ought to have a dimension beyond making a living and going to Acapulco. I think at that time you did have a concern about people becoming too materialistic.
Yes, and I guess when you're in the middle of a campaign, and that was right in the middle of the campaign, you tend to see a narrower gauge of society. You know, you go to the symphony and you're not thinking about the music, you're thinking, how do I capture that symphony vote? And I do think that in that period of time, I don't know that my perspective is as good as I think it is now. But I've been out of public office for exactly 2 years, and I've had a chance to sit back and appreciate the direction we're going. And my own children are, you know, in that age now where I measure them and their friends, and I feel good about the general course. It's not to say it couldn't all fall apart. I mean, we could end up having another Vietnam, or we could end up with some crazy nuclear war or some great materialism where we just forget about the poor and the disadvantaged. But I think the odds are that won't happen.
You spent 10 years going after crooks, and you were not one to avoid the courtroom. I think you got a pleasure out of trying certain cases.
Gives you a chance to get away from the phone.
Were there any particular kinds of criminals that bothered you more than others? White-collar criminals, homicides?
Well, I like the white-collar crimes because intellectually they were a real challenge, and I always liked the swindlers, personally. You know, the ones you would prosecute, they were fascinating human beings. I did hit a saturation point when I prosecuted Dr. James Franklin in that terrible abortion death case. That was the first time I'd ever tried a case where I couldn't sleep at night. And that bothered me, and I marveled at the deputies that dealt with that violence every day, far more than I did, and their ability to keep a generally upward spirit while dealing with the black side of society. But that was a saturation point for me, and I think it was appropriate that I left the DA's office about the time I did, even if I were not going to run for mayor at that time.
What was it about it that, can you tell me?
It was the callousness of the way this criminal, he was convicted, dealt with human beings, and what he had done to many others, and the way this young woman died with her 4-year-old child watching her die, and just the tragedy and senselessness of it. It was not an emotional barroom fight. It was not a crime committed to feed the family. It was, I thought, the combination of the worst of the swindlers combined with the worst of the violent offenders. And I was angry about the case. And generally, you know, you try to distance yourself. Your job is not to seek convictions. It is first to do justice. And, you know, we tried hard to do that. But that case, I really had to bite my tongue not to go too far in the trial in terms of describing what a terrible crime and actor this guy was.
Dr. Franklin had a long history before he ever made it to Denver. He was in California and down in New Mexico before he came to Denver.
Right, and I had researched that, and of course I talked to some of these victims that had survived, but yet luckily survived, who might well have gone the way of this victim in this trial. And I just thought, how could someone who is educated, who has taken an oath to heal, do what he has done and feel no remorse over it? And you know, I've sat there long enough to see juries come in and to hear the sentences, the verdicts read, and to be present at sentencing, to take no more joy in that. But on that day, when that jury came back, I felt some joy in that conviction, and you ought not feel that.
You know, you have a tremendous capacity to hire all kinds of individuals for your office. I think of Doyle Marshall and Brooke Wanneke. These are individuals that are up in years. It's a delight to see somebody like Doyle Marshall, a retired postal inspector, working on cases and actively pursuing criminals. Give me some insight into Doyle and why you hired him.
Well, I hired him. I had not known him, but I had heard he was good. And so when I heard he was leaving the post inspector's office, we hired him on a special case or two and got him intrigued by getting involved, and then I made him chief investigator. The good thing about a guy like Doyle Marshall was he always got the truth. He never pushed further. And I figured the other day that I spent 40 days in the courtroom prosecuting cases that Doyle Marshall had investigated. And not once in that whole period of time did anyone accuse him of unfairness, of putting down the statements more than what the witness said, of overreaching. His view was the classic view. Get the truth, put it on as simply and as straightforward as you can, and the system of justice will come out okay.
You also hired Dana Wakefield, who is blind, and Dana is now a juvenile court judge here in Denver. Tell me why you hired Dana Wakefield.
Well, you know, that is really more a tribute to the staff, because I would not have done it. And the staff came to me and said, you really should hire him. We're a public office, and we ought to go the extra mile for people who are disadvantaged. So I hired him with that urging. It was the best decision I ever made. But I paid him less. It was taxpayers' money, and I was reluctant about it. And I learned years later that he had been selling products door to door in the evening to pay for his reader. I felt terrible about it. He became a chief deputy and head of the juvenile unit in the office, and I then arranged the budget so we provided him a reader. It was a bargain for the public, and he's been a superb judge and will be a great jurist in the future.
I think the thing that most people have told me is that you were a great administrator. How did you administer as well as you did?
Well, I don't know if I was great. I tried to stay out of the way. You know, it was clear to me that if you got good people, you got to give them maximum authority and kind of manage by exception. Set the basic priorities, hire people who are good, get the necessary appropriations so the office can do professionally what it ought to do, and to be a buffer for all that criticism that comes down. And I think that if you do that, then if you get in the way, you could over-administer if you're not careful. And I know that some people don't agree with that style, but I felt comfortable with it. It is a dangerous style if you have inadequate people or unfair people, because I think great injustice can be done.
You spend your, I think, the past couple of years in the DA's office taking a hard look at the criminal justice system. What are the flaws, if any, that you see in our criminal justice system, and how would you improve it?
Well, I do think that we have reached a point of form over substance. And I'm not talking about taking away anybody's rights. I am as much an advocate of the Bill of Rights as you or anyone else. But I am convinced that we have over-lawyered it. When judges spend more time hearing motions, pretrial motions, motions to suppress, post-trial motions than they do trials, than they do searching for the truth, something's out of balance. And I would like to, with full preservation of the human rights that this country is based on, I would like to see more of what the English have done better in that regard, that is, getting to the truth of the matter. I listened the other day to a CLE, continuing legal education, tape by a defense lawyer, and I was shocked to hear him say on it, he said his view is that a defendant ought to take the stand and lie. If he is being prosecuted, he ought to take the stand and lie. I find that an absolutely shocking position for a lawyer to take, because I don't happen to think that lawyers are just hired guns. And I would like very much to see the bar, both sides of the aisle, move toward a greater commitment toward a search for the truth. That's a slow process, but I think there are steps moving that way.
Do you think our judges should be elected?
No, I don't think they should be elected, and I worked on the constitutional amendment to remove them from election. But that's not to say I think the present system is necessarily perfect. I think there's got to be another accountability feature in there, and whether that's a confirmation by the Senate, some mechanism beyond what we now have, I think is important, because I think the public as a whole feels that the judges are not responsive. I don't want judges responsive to the mob, but I do think that judges they're part of the government after all. And I think accountability is important, and I think people would know more about how their judiciary is working. And the judges would have greater public support if there were a mechanism to have them confirmed other than simply that initial appointment by the governor.
Looking back on your 10 years as DA, were you frustrated? Was it a frustrating job, a tiring job? How would you characterize the 10 years?
I did not get frustrated by the public. I did not get frustrated by the criminals. I got frustrated by two things. I got frustrated by the career criminals who were let out inappropriately early and simply continued a life of crime, and that struck me as senseless. And I was secondly frustrated by the bureaucracy of government. More, I guess, at the federal level, it's worse. But I came away thinking that, as Thomas Jefferson said, that government is best which governs least. I do think that we can create such a layer of bureaucracy that I think it hurts the functioning of government. And I think we were approaching that in this country. And I say that as, I guess, one with a liberal view of where we ought to be going.
Well, I'm trying to think of the times that I've seen you relaxed and pretty enthused. I remember after you came back from Russia, you just seemed to be so bubbly to have been able to go over there and travel in that country and compare their system to ours. And I think you came back feeling that we had a much superior system.
Oh, I did indeed. I thought the Russian system, you know, I thought the people were terrific, and I thought the government was terrible. And I thought they were unfair and chauvinistic and untrustworthy. And we engaged in some very heated negotiations with officials at the very highest levels, Supreme Court justices, the equivalent of the Attorney General, members of the cabinet, on the whole question of the right of Soviet Jews to immigrate. And, you know, those were not pleasant confrontations. But I guess I felt good about that because the following year, the immigrations went up to 50,000, which is the highest in the history of the Soviet Union. And in some small way, I think we participated in that having come about. And I felt good about having that kind of or at least a part in that kind of an impact.
Dale, I think the thing that you told me repeatedly during your 10 years was how much you loved Denver. You were born here. I don't think you ever really wanted to leave. You didn't express any interest in national office as far as I know.
No, I had opportunities and to do that, and I just, foggy bottoms has never been my bag.
What is it about this town? Is it the people? Is it the outlook? Is it the mountains? What is it?
Well, I don't know what it is. I do think that we are unique in having the second best educated black population in the country, a Hispanic population which is, I think, progressing remarkably well, an attitude generally of, you know, the Orientals come here and they're treated better than they are in a whole lot of the country. I think a competitive political system, a government that works better with less bribery and corruption than most parts of the country. I think the sort of cutting edge of high tech and transportation. And I think the environment, we could improve on it, but the basic setting here. And I think the general goodness of the people here is as good as any city I've ever seen. Now, maybe everybody feels that about their hometown, but I feel that way even after not having been elected mayor.
Now, a look back over the years with today's recollections. Don Kinney continues our profile.
Show you a few little highlights of your public life. And in fact, we're going to go back quite a step. Here we are, November 28th, 1970.
I intend to run, and with your help, we're going to win. You know, Denver is a good city. It has a potential for greatness. But we have a trend toward mediocrity. We have the same mushrooming problems which have overwhelmed some eastern cities. But we still have time to solve those problems. We're drifting, frankly, in a vacuum because of a lack of energetic leadership and because of a lack of clear direction in our city.
Well, I remember that vividly. That was the closest election in the history of Denver. I remember the weekend before the election, the Denver Post poll projected me the winner by a 3-2 margin. And last-minute tactics, I guess I'd call them, reversed that. It was a very close, less than 2,000 votes separated us. But it was certainly a learning experience. And it was the first run I had made at major political office, and I learned a lot.
The tactics were
Well, I guess the most disreputable in the history of Denver politics, the weekend before the election, the opponents came out with a Tooley Barnes bunch, a busing issue, which was irrelevant to the campaign and actually not accurate at all. And it was an emotional scare technique which was powerfully effective and reversed what was the result of the absentee vote, so you could see what the effect of that was in the final 3 days.
Because of the closeness of that race way back in the early 70s, did you decide to run again?
No. No, one thing, I made a lot of mistakes over my career and have, but one thing I always did was not try to think about tomorrow, election night. And I did not think about politics for, a while, and then I was asked to run for district attorney the following year and did. And then my interest in the city, as opposed to elsewhere, kept my interest in the mayor's office. Matter of fact, I think it's true that historically I was a finalist in the mayor's race more often than any person, including all mayors in the history of the city.
Because you were a finalist 3 times?
Yeah, that had never happened before in a June election. I think I'm also the only one who ever carried 55% of the precincts and lost the election. So I wasn't doing something right.
Unsuccessful at mayor 3 times, but 3 times successful as DA.
Yeah, that's a remarkable part, isn't it? In 1980, I led the ticket in Denver with almost 64% of the vote. But it's a funny thing, and I think that in the process of serving in public office, you pick up some scars. The people you prosecute, you're making a lot of controversial decisions, and I think those have an impact.
Which kept you in the public eye 7 days a week. Did you tire of that?
No, I thought it went with the job. I think that the public's entitled to know what their government is doing. We did an awful lot that the media never knew about, that they shouldn't have known about. I can remember a former very high official in this state going through a full investigation as a suspect in a grand jury investigation, and the media never knew about it. We smuggled him in and out of the grand jury room at night, things like that that did not get into the media and should not have, but things that where we made mistakes, they sure got in the media, and they should have. The trials, of course, are public. The various crime prevention efforts and reform projects we worked on were public. And they wouldn't have been successful if they weren't public, so I looked at it as part of the territory.
Who was the person we shouldn't have known about?
There were a lot of them.
Give me a few.
Well, there are even a few in the media. I guess we took the view, unless it was otherwise publicly known, we would not disclose the names of subjects of investigation. And that's, I think, a very good rule. It avoids character assassination. And I wouldn't tell you even today.
You won't share it with us?
No.
Well, among your responsibilities as district attorney in February of 1981, what was a big economic story broke in Denver? Your observations.
However, they've got some good news.
During the last 3 years, the penny stock market has been gaining momentum, as if a huge locomotive has been pushing at full power. But a caution light was swung before penny stock buyers this last week, because while there have been incredible monetary benefits for many buyers, critics and regulators of the market fear a day of reckoning is coming. District Attorney Dale Tooley.
The targets of our investigation currently are some brokers and some salesmen. Certainly not most of them in the penny stock business. Most of them operate honestly and within the law. But we're obviously investigating reports of misrepresentation or failure to tell the true story about some of these penny stocks. A lot of money is involved, and we have a felony securities fraud law that we are using. Well, I remember that, and I feel, interestingly, better about that investigation than almost any other. There were fewer convictions in that investigation, and I took a lot of heat on it. People who were making money in the stock market blamed me when we gave the caution light, but an awful lot of practice has changed because we had some people undercover in some of the securities houses, and we therefore could monitor how the practice has changed. And I think we saved untold thousands of people from being victims of sharp practices.
There were a lot of sharp words about you.
Oh, sure. I met with the, called the Venture Capital Association, and with those people more than once, and was as candid as I could be. It was not a meeting where the media was there, and told them exactly what the problems were and what our concerns were and how they ought to be shaped up. And they took that very personally. Most people who are subjects of investigations do. But to their credit, they cleaned up their act, maybe not willingly, but they cleaned up their act.
Let us take you to May of 1983 for what really was a very happy night for you and your family.
It ought to be a good runoff. I think this was the best quality mayoral team of candidates I think the city's ever had.
Okay, your third try for mayor. You finally defeated Bill McNichols. Is there elation, sorrow, what?
Well, you know, Mayor McNichols has love and dedication for this city, which is unquestioned, and he's served longer, more consecutive years as mayor than anybody in Denver's history. I think you have to understand and appreciate that. I think what I said in May of '83, I would say today. I think he had a dedication to this city which was deep and abiding, and I think he conducted that office to the best of his ability as he saw it. We did not always see eye to eye on what the priorities were and how the city ought to be administered, but no one could take away from his desire to make this the great place that it ought to be.
Mr. Tooley, one of the things that transpired that evening was here was Dale Tooley, the candidate, your wife Mary Ann, your children. It was basically a family event. But when you're a district attorney, you couldn't share a lot of your life with your family, could you?
Oh, sure I did. I didn't share names, but I would come home at night and we'd have dinner, and we used to play a game. I'd say, guess who said they're going to kill me today? Or guess who called me a mountebank or something worse? It's going to be in tomorrow's press. And it was an important thing to do because the kids, you know, I was sometimes very controversial, and it was important the kids put that in perspective. And the kids were involved. I guess every victory celebration and every concession speech I made, they were there. And I thought that was very important. They wanted to be there, but I thought it was important to their growth to see that winning isn't everything. Losing is second best, but the way the process works is important. And to see what good winners and good losers look like.
Let me take you back to this explaining over dinner the threats and the cases. The next day, they knew who they were. They knew who the participants were because it was in the press.
Well, the threats were usually not. You know, we would get, they were usually humorous, and I think generally people who were drunk, and our phone was always listed. So sometimes the kids would pick up one of those, and they just had to understand that most of that was just smoke, or they would have become paranoid. It's a burden to raise a family when you're in a public office, and Mary Ann and I tried to make it as much of a job where there's a humorous vein in it as we possibly could.
Back to this same night in May of '83, you had your political headquarters, all the media were there. It was simply mayhem. Is that really fun?
Well, you're with a lot of people that are very good and dear friends. I never think of it in terms of a crowd of strangers. I think of it as a wave of support. And sure, I enjoyed that process. I would not choose to go through it again. I mean, I have done that. Even if I were not sick, I would, you know, you reach a point where you've done that phase of your life.
The last debate in your last run for mayor, which came just a month later, you talked about the quality of the two candidates. Some of the advertising apparently wasn't up to the standards that particularly you would expect, but you said that it was really something good for the city.
We are engaged in a very long campaign. This is, I think, the 110th forum and debate. This is not a campaign where at least the two of us have ducked these opportunities to be cross-examined. And I think on balance, if it happens that I've been unhappy with some of Federico's ads, I'm sure he with some of mine. But as I view this campaign overall, I guess I have to come down believing that what the New Republic said about this campaign is true, and what Governor Love said about the campaign, that it is, on balance, a credit to Denver.
Yes, I thought it was a civilized campaign. I thought it was a cut above campaigns for major offices in most cities. I think it was a cut above campaigns generally in this state and city. And the fact that the record turnout occurred was not just by chance. I think it occurred because there was a lot of dialogue. It was more expensive than it should have been. They always are. But more people were involved. You know, we had 4,000 volunteers, and I'm sure Federico had an equal number. And I think that the system operates better with that kind of campaign. What distresses me is that this last fall I saw some campaigns that didn't have that flavor, and I'm not very happy about that.
Examples?
Some of the state legislative campaigns where there was so much animosity that the loser would not even go over and congratulate the winner. Continuing threats after the campaign. I just think those are a terrible way to treat the process.
A lot of what we see in politics is pretty tough, slow-going stuff. In fact, sometimes pretty boring. What have been the highlights?
The people are always the highlights. I think about some of the dumb things I've done and how well people respond to them, even at that, and those are highlights. I think the receptivity of the average citizen to good programs and the perception of when they're getting a lot of smoke, I think those are highlights, and the people you meet. I'll tell you, I had occasion to meet people from presidents on down during all this time, and I learned that the quality of those in public office doesn't change a lot from the White House to Denver, Colorado. They just spend more money back there.
Here is an excerpt. The last thing it is a heavy topic, and again, it comes from our same debate in June of '83.
But I am not of a mind that that's going to be accomplished very quickly or very easily, but I support the change.
Dave Krieger.
I want to know if the two of you go to the same fashion consultant.
If Steve Schweizberger was still running, he would ask why you're still wearing that same red tie.
That's my question. We're not using the same consultant you're using. Mr. Tooley, that makes me feel less bad about the question I'm about to ask you.
Those were interesting times. That was at the Paramount Theater, a Denver Post-sponsored debate. And it was televised, I recall. I think Channel 6 televised it, in fact.
Yes.
And I thought it was one that had a better group of questions than, than some debates.
What are the fun memories you have of all those debates over the years?
Oh, I think just the contact with the candidates, the funny things that happen, you get to know some of the people in the crowd or some of the questions. You get to know exactly what the answers are going to be from the various candidates. You develop a certain degree of camaraderie among the candidates in the process. And you laugh about your goofs. I did my share of them. I remember one time walking into a Capitol Hill rally, reception, and met a guy at the door, and he said his name was Mr. Woodchuck, and name association. Remember names you work at. And he was still standing at the door when we finished, and I walked out, and I said, I'm very glad to meet you, Mr. Chipmunk. And you remember, and you tell those kinds of stories to your fellow candidates, and they swap comparable ones.
This, Dale Tooley, is kind of a summary.
I want to be mayor of this city because I genuinely believe the experience that I've had over particularly the last 10 years, my priorities, my vision for where we want to go, my commitment to the decency and quality of the citizenry in this community, the uniqueness of where we are located in terms of our economic potential, in terms of our climate, in terms of all the things that make and can make this the very best urban center, lead me to believe that there is no more important calling than to leave this place better than I found it, and to be able to participate in that position where we can make this a gemstone of urban livability. And that's very much what I hope to do, and I welcome your support to that end. Thank you very much.
Dale Tooley.
I still believe that. I think those words, as I recall, that part was not from a prepared script particularly. I had decided in that debate not to prepare ahead of time. And I, in fact, had just given a speech about a half an hour before that debate. And I just thought I would play that ending by ear, and that more came from the heart.
You have said publicly, just in an offhanded way, that when we discuss cancer, that it's gotten 80–90% of, how do you say it, your belly?
Oh, a couple of vital organs in the process.
Why do you say it that way?
I think people are so fearful of the subject that people understand the word belly, and I think it is a more direct way to speak of it. I just think to the extent that people can use terms that are not clinical. I was intrigued the other day. I was at Rotary, and I was introduced. I was on the day I was up there, and my good friend Kerm Darkey introduced me, and I noticed he said, and he is fighting the great battle, and introduced me to the Rotarians. And that happens all the time. People will not use the words cancer or possibility of dying because it is a taboo subject, and part of the reason is we've talked about it so clinically, and yet it is a life process. And so I guess when I was called upon to comment publicly, I thought I ought to do it in as plain language as possible.
This medium of television permits us to be very personal. You can talk with one other person. You talk with ease about the fact that you have cancer, that you know you're going to die. Would you like, in some form, to say goodbye?
No, because I don't think I'll be leaving any sooner than anybody else. My view is that there is always hope, and that everyone one day is going to die. This is a temporary scenario that all of us have on this planet. I guess I'd rather say hello.
And follow that with?
Well, and good health. I guess evolution is a gradual process, and I do believe that people can go through life just playing bridge, or just going to Acapulco, you know, or just acquiring material goods, or just enjoying themselves. And if they do that, they will have left out meaning, which is more important than all those. And I think that people in every field, there's nothing unique about politics or government. People contribute in all kinds of ways in the private sector in this country. The media certainly contributes, but to build a society and make it better when you leave than when you're born, I think is one of the callings of mankind. And people who do not feel that way, I feel very sorry for.
Blind, but now I see. Let it shine on me, let it shine on me. Let your light from the lighthouse shine on me. Let it shine on me, let it shine on me. Let your light from the lighthouse shine on me. Now here comes the Holy Ghost. The Holy Ghost come along late. And when they come along late, they get your name straight because they drive the song. Don't fool yourself.